Hello everyone, it's the Sky Priestess. I am re-recording this video and uploading it separately on account of internet issues here, but I do thank all of those who did attempt to try to tune in live directly. Today we're going to be talking about erased goddesses in the more conventional interpretation of the myth of Inanna's descent. Now some of you may wonder why on earth is she even talking about this? But those of you who have followed my work for a long time know that my work is an intersection of astrology, spirituality, politics, goddess research, pilgrimage, and deep connection with the earth and the stars. So it is very multifaceted. Today is a very important day as well, as it marks the 10-year anniversary of when I began this work publicly. So it has been 10 years of sharing my research and journeys and travels and travails with all of you who have been following me. When I first began, I started with a page on Facebook called The Goddess, the Serpent, and the Sea, Building Pathways of Light, followed by a community called the Dark Mother's Children. And these were efforts that did not try to pedestalize the archetype of goddess in the way that so many others were doing, but rather these were spaces to discover what a true connection with the feminized aspect of spirit could be. Effectively, be it in mythology, be it in the way mythology is reinterpreted, recirculated, often in a bastardized form, we actually see how our conceptions of what it means to be a goddess either get exaggerated, distorted, or limited through human reinterpretation and commodification. Now, for those of you who have been following me for a long time, you also know that I have been known to speak up against the commodification of spirituality and also the kind of false waves of consciousness that people are pushing to others in the name of goddess, which is something that I have always been very firmly against. Effectively, when we talk about that feminine experience of spirit, we're talking about something that is formless, something that is so core to our experience of life itself and those liminal stages of transition into death, into rebirth, and the beyond that have no words, no concept. It is the great mystery. And of course, you can look at anthropological sources to see how this formless, wordless communion with the many aspects of the feminine is what shaped so many traditional societies and how humanity itself began. Now, be it due to changes in economy, in politics, changes in spiritual thought, changes in religious thought, eventually these feminine-centric practices gave way to more patriarchal understandings of God and divinity. And of course, that led to monotheism, and that's led to a lot of damage and erasure and harm towards aspects of the sacred feminine, or rather how the feminine could be seen as in itself equal and inherently worthy. Now, in a time where it is far more accepted to talk about the influence of sexuality that is not confined to a single gender or a non-binary state of being, this is something that I've been writing about for years. Effectively, even when I talk about the goddess, when I talk about a feminized experience of spirit, it is not something that is limited to any particular set of genitalia or lack thereof. It is something that moves through all things, incarnate and disincarnate. That experience of the feminine is one that is not limited to those who are born with boobs, with a vagina, and so on and so forth. It is accessible to all. In my journeys, especially in this past 10 years, when I used to conduct workshops at very sacred points of intersection on the planet, I explored this through a workshop with the void, so to speak, giving participants an experience of what it means to enter that space of transformative liminality. And that is work that I did enjoy doing, but life called me in different directions, and hopefully I have more scope for that in the future. But having said all of that, what does that have to do with today, with the now, with this 10th year anniversary of my public work? Of course, this is coming at the same time that Venus has stationed direct, and of course Jupiter has stationed retrograde. But effectively, Venus stationing direct is the end of the Venus retrograde, and Venus is of course associated with the goddess Inanna. So having said all of that as a preface, let me talk about the actual heart of what I want to discuss today. And that is how the myth of the descent of Inanna has been repackaged, reinterpreted, completely distorted in ways that blur actual feminine agency, that erase the voices, the energies of key goddess figures, and that create a kind of script of feminine consciousness in the myth of the heroine on her journey that actually don't have anything to do with the original text at all. Now, I know this can be triggering for a lot of people, given that tens of thousands of people talk about the descent of Inanna from a Jungian psychoanalytic perspective and from neo-goddess revisionist interpretations, but that doesn't mean that is what the original was talking about. As spiritualists, when we invoke certain names, if these names actually have power, the moment we invoke certain names and we attribute narratives to them that do not actually have anything to do with them, that is when we actually open the gateway for false forms of consciousness, for false light, and for spiritual misdirection. Which is why a healthy dose of reality often helps. So there is a trigger warning on this piece, as it does involve themes of violence, themes of sexual violence, themes of death, of grief, and so on and so forth. But if you're following me, you should be able to handle this. I already have a long article prepared in which I'm going to throw in a whole bunch of references, and I hope to make this an academic article as well, in which I critique the way the psychoanalytic school of thought, so to speak, has on the one hand changed the protagonist of the story, and on the other hand, it has actually missed out on tremendous opportunities to identify various other goddesses, namely Ereshkigal and Gesthinanna, who is not Inanna, is a different goddess, as figures that show early examples of the therapeutic approach and also dream analysis. In other words, the roots of psychoanalysis itself. It is cosmically ironic that a parable that is used to talk about how one must face the shadow has completely been distorted in and of itself. And the real meaning of the text and how it is presented have nothing at all to do with each other anymore. So let's get into it. Inanna, most of you would already know as, Sumerian, Mesopotamian goddess who was also known as the Queen of Heaven. She's associated with love, with war, but really sexuality and aggression. In my reading, and it's not just something that I'm saying, this is something that more and more scholars have been saying in the past few years, Inanna was not really a nice person. She very frequently did things that seemed very violent, very cruel, and by trying to fix her into this ideal archetype of goddess, a lot of that is also missed. So let me talk about how this actually fits into what we're talking about today. So the myth of the descent of Inanna comes from a poem. But to understand the meaning of this poem, we need to look at a different poem, one that precedes it, namely that of Gilgamesh and the Bull of Heaven. So in this, we see Inanna making sexual advances towards Gilgamesh. She wants him as her lover. And, that's fine. She's not hung up about sexuality and so on and so forth, which is the reason why Inanna is such a popular figure. She literally tells her husband Dumuzi on numerous occasions how she wants her vulva to be plowed. This woman is not shy. But Gilgamesh rejects Inanna. And he does not do so in a rude way. He simply says, look, I know what you've been doing with your previous lovers, and I don't really want that fate, which is totally fair. However, Inanna gets resentful at the rejection, and then she appeals to Father God, and she demands that the Bull of Heaven be released. Now, the bull of heaven is not an ordinary bull. It is a being that brings about mass destruction and even 7 years of famine on the earth. But effectively, Inanna gets away by threatening the destruction of the underworld itself, saying that she would bring the dead back to feast upon the living. And so, in the face of that threat, they kind of had to, give her what she wanted. So, the bull is unleashed upon the city of Uruk, and effectively, lots of innocent people die. And however, the bull is conquered by the heroes Gilgamesh and Enkidu. And well, there's a whole bunch of other things that happen, but it's not too germane to what we're talking about today. But effectively, the bull is dead. And here's the tie-in to the descent of Inanna. The bull is actually Inanna's brother-in-law. He is the husband, or he was the husband of Ereshkigal, her older sister. So at the start of the poem surrounding Inanna's descent, Inanna is seeking to go down to the underworld to attend the funeral of her brother-in-law, whose death she caused. And that's the starting point. Already it's so different from the idea that we are given that she was this innocent victim that got stuck down there, that through sacrifice and acceptance found herself back to the light through some profound heroine's initiation. That's not what happened. Inanna basically wants to go to the funeral for various reasons. One time she says it's for the libations that her sister Ereshkigal would be pouring generously, libation meaning beer. And also the other gods recognize that Inanna has ambitions upon the underworld. She craves for the world of the underworld, meaning that this has got to do more so with ambition and power rather than being there for her sister in her time of grief or showing any real remorse for her actions. This is in the text. This is not interpretation. This is directly in the text. So she gets dressed up. She wears symbols of her divinity. She wears mascara and I believe a kind of ornament on her breast, which is literally all about, telling the man to come to her, and she shows up at the gates of the underworld. But there's 7 gates before she can get to Ereshkigal's palace. Now, by the time she gets to the 7th gate, she is stripped naked of all of her clothes and all of her symbols of power and symbols of divinity. And you got to understand that in the Sumerian context, divinity was not moral goodness. It was not righteousness. You could do whatever you wanted to do, and unless you are delegitimized by a god, nothing really happens. You remain a god or goddess, irrespective of your behavior. Now, the Sumerians had a big problem when human beings and human kings dared to try to establish themselves as gods, which tells you how strict they were on that dichotomy between god and regular mortal. But having said that, Inanna is, by the time she reaches the palace of Ereshkigal, she's naked. She's forced to bow. And then she sits on her sister's throne. And here's where something interesting happens that completely changes the meaning of how the descent of Inanna is reproduced uncritically all over the world. The 7 judges of the underworld appear. And of course, these 7 judges are the Anunnaki, also known as the Anunna. And effectively, these 7 judges say, look, you are guilty. They find her guilty. They find that she has committed a crime. And once the judgment is passed, that is when Ereshkigal strikes her dead and hangs her on a meat hook where she remains for 3 days and 3 nights. So what has happened to Inanna is not some, terrible tragedy at the behest of fate. It is not something that an innocent person has experienced undeservedly, and that's how so many people approach this myth. This is actually an act of legitimate justice. And this is a very, very big point in the text. Because if you actually look at the text, at the very end of it, you see that the praises are sung to Ereshkigal, not to Inanna. Inanna is not the protagonist, as in she is not the moral figure that one is meant to read in this text. Because at the time this would have been written, people were expected to take inspiration from Ereshkigal rather than Inanna, for reasons that I will talk about in a little bit. So, she's basically been killed in the underworld because of her own actions. Now let's talk about her resurrection. There was no humble surrender involved. As per the text, Inanna actually made arrangements with her very loyal minister, Ninshubur, and she basically tells her, look, if I don't come back as expected, I want you to lacerate your face, your nose, and go in private and lacerate your buttocks. I want you to wear a garment, just a single garment over your body like a pauper. And then I want you to go and appeal to the gods for help. So she does this. The minister does precisely this. And she goes to different gods, like Enlil, like Nana, and both of them are just like, no, she craved the underworld and she has to be subject to its laws. She decided to go there. It's not something we can do, we can intervene in. See, the Sumerians were very, very clear that Ereshkigal was to be respected and the law of her realm had to be respected. Because if anything happened there, there would be chaos. The dead would flood the lands of the living. And so they didn't want to upset her. There was a very clear reason for that. Now, Inanna's political ambitions, is the way I'm reading it, her political ambitions got thwarted because she was found guilty of crime. So her minister finally manages to get Enki to help her. And Enki then summons two demons. Here there's a bit of different interpretation. Some say they are asexual demons, some say they are transgender demons, but effectively they are demons of indeterminate gender. These two beings are then given very strict instructions by Enki to rescue Inanna. They are told how to assuage the grief and the pain of Ereshkigal. They are told what to do, what to reject, and what to administer to Inanna once they obtain her corpse. So the two demons go down. They basically enter the underworld as flies, passing through the gates as phantoms, and they witness Ereshkigal. Ereshkigal she's bereft. Even though she has just given birth, her breasts are not full. Her shoulders are not covered. She is not sitting in the way, the form that would be expected of one of her position. Now, yeah, and there's a reason, two reasons for this. One is because she has just given birth. But even then, her breasts are not full. Her hair is still, it is messy. It is not at all the form that she should be having. But the second reason this is happening to Ereshkigal is that she is, of course, in deep grief. Because not only has she lost her husband, her child has also lost their father. So she is in deep grief, she is in deep rage, and completely understandably so. And so she cries out. And this is the way the two demons were told to alleviate her grief. When she cries out, to repeat what she says. So if she says, oh, my heart, they would say something like, oh, mistress, your heart. And if she would say, oh, my liver, and they would say, oh, mistress, your liver. And I feel that this was not just about the pains of birth, because nowhere does she actually, reference her genitalia. And this particular civilization had no real qualms in naming feminine genitalia. They were very open about it. But she talks about the whole body. She talks about the heart. She talks about the liver, which used to be seen as the seat of the soul. It is, for me, it is the somatization of profound grief at the loss of her husband. In addition, of course, to the pain of childbirth. But if eventually she goes, who are you beings and why are you echoing everything I'm saying? But she is pleased because someone has echoed, has validated, has affirmed her pain and has offered her sympathy. So Ereshkigal, as predicted by Enki, then offers a boon to both the demons. And they ask for the corpse of Inanna. They reject other gifts, they ask for the corpse. And then they administer the earth and water of life given to them by Enki to bring Inanna back to life. And voila, Inanna is resurrected. But that's not where it ends. Inanna must then face the judges of the underworld once more, and they say, look, you can't just leave the underworld. You need to find a substitute. And so a demonic posse forms, and they go to the world, and they start looking for a substitute for Inanna. And Inanna sees various people she knows, but they see that they are mourning for her, that they are in pain, they are in anguish that she has died. And then she comes upon her husband Dumuzi, and she realizes Dumuzi is wearing fine clothes, and in one translation is being entertained by slave women. And so she decides that Dumuzi would then take her place. So before we go further into the myth and the original text, we see that her resurrection had nothing to do with humility, had nothing to do with acknowledging her psychological shadow. It had to do with her political acumen, her foresight, strategy, the fact that she knew she could get help. She knew she had a loyal minister who would follow her instructions to T. And she knew that the way that she would need to be resurrected was not, in that sense, in her hands at all. Ultimately, it came down to the fact that Ereshkigal was able to forgive the injustice committed against her in the name of the greater good. And that is how, my friends, Inanna is actually resurrected. Tell me again how this is a template for Inanna's heroine journey, because to me, it sounds like a very, very clever political strategy. But and again, that is why at the end of this poem, even though it's called the Descent of Inanna, it is Ereshkigal who is honored. But moving along, once Inanna actually finds that her husband is not really mourning her death, she then decides that he's going to take her place, which is problematic in different ways, but okay. Moving along in the text, we see that her husband Dumuzi has already been warned by his sister Gesthinanna. And again, she's not the same as Inanna. She's not an aspect or a small part of her. Inanna means queen of heaven. Geshti means grapevine. So Gesthinanna was the grapevine of heaven. She in herself was a goddess of vegetation, of agriculture, and making sure life was good in a broader sense of the term. Gesthinanna later becomes a scribe of the underworld due to the events that will unfold. So Gesthinanna knows that her brother is facing this huge peril because she has, in the tradition of psychoanalysis, she has actually interpreted the dream that Dumuzi has as mentioned in previous poems. So this woman already knows that something is coming for her brother and she wants to help her brother. So eventually, the demons come, and in one version of the story, they torture Gesthinanna. They rip off her clothes, they pour hot pitch, which is like a tar substance, into her vulva, and still she refuses to give her brother up. But eventually they find him, and they decree that he has to be sent to the underworld to take Inanna's place, which is also her punishment for transgression. Now, whether the judges wanted her there because she disrespected the underworld, or because she abused the will of heaven for her personal reasons, or because she led to the death of her brother-in-law, there are very many reasons. That is not specified. But the woman was found guilty. And Dumuzi had to pay the price. So Dumuzi's sister, Gesthinanna, then appeals that she take her brother's place, because this is her sister who truly loves her brother. And out of love, she makes this appeal. But ultimately, it is decided that each sibling would remain for half a year in the underworld annually. And in that sense, that is very much a part of the myth that we also see in Persephone. But we see here a heroine, a true heroine, in the way we understand the term in the here and now, emerge using her insight, her instincts, her foresight to save her loved one rather than throwing them under the bus. We see a goddess here who has heavenly and underworld attributes, who brings vegetation and agriculture, and is also a scribe in the court of Ereshkigal. So she is actively involved in the justice process, at the very least in writing the records. So we see an incredible figure here that has been completely erased. Now, people have some understanding of Ereshkigal. She's not erased in the sense that her name is mentioned, but the reasons, the context for her grief is often not acknowledged. The fact that the death of Inanna came as a legitimate judgment from the underworld is also not mentioned. So Ereshkigal is often, her name is there, but his actual role in the story is often reframed in a very, very strange way. Gesthinanna, on the other hand, is almost not at all mentioned. But more and more scholars in recent years have looked at this and gone, she had what, poured where, and she still didn't talk? That has struck a chord with people who are willing to look at this original source information. But eventually, Inanna goes scot-free. So tell me again how this willingness to let innocence suffer for the sins that one has committed is a template for individual transformation and the maturation of the soul. How does that work? How does society get away with with the idea that this was some deep symbolic and transformative experience of the soul, when it was a very carefully contrived stratagem to retrieve Inanna, knowing that she was very likely to be caught there in the first place? The woman is intelligent, no doubt about that, but that's not the transformative essence that psychoanalytic theory and neo-revisionist understandings of the goddess are trying to get to. And we have to ask ourselves, why was this even allowed in the first place? Was it just sloppy scholarship? Was it someone taking a cool idea and, running along with it? Or was it the fact that Inanna was sexy? And, having a goddess figure who was unashamed about her sexuality would literally be a much more likable figure than one who had to sit in the underworld and, preside over the dead. So, there are key questions here. And if you think about it, the level of spiritual bypassing, the level of unresolved wounds surrounding the goddess, surrounding sacred femininity that have persisted within the spiritual community, are we really that surprised that these forms of bypassing and unrecognized shadow work are still present? When something as fundamental as Inanna's descent and the implications of that allegory have been so distorted for so long and by so many. As I said earlier, this is the way false goddesses, false consciousness, and false light is created. When we change the meaning of things to fit what we want, rather than recognizing it for what they actually are. If anyone is interested, I would say there is a far more intriguing and inspirational template of agency within the figures both of Ereshkigal and Gesthinanna, for those who want to look and those who want to understand. But that is work that requires you to also look at how those concepts that were projected were so easy to internalize. Why was it so easy to internalize this narrative? Why did it go unchallenged for so long? And in doing that work of critical self-reception, there is true gold to be found within this, but only if we are willing to let go of the lie. And this is not meant to disrespect Goddess Inanna in any way. It's not her fault that this happened. And this is not the only goddess whose story has been completely taken out of context and changed. It's something that's been done many times over, and it's probably going to continue to be done unless people speak up and say no. Respect the text or make up your own damn mythology. So that is what I wanted to talk about today on this special occasion for me, 10 years of this work, and of course the stationing of Venus direct, marking the end of the retrograde. I hope this is food for thought. I hope it is inspiration. I hope, like me, you feel deeply moved of the real anguish and sacrifice in the name of love that we actually find in the myth, that is so much more powerful than what it is commonly purported to be. I am going to be publishing an academic article on this, which will be supported by references to primary sources, which you can actually find online, and you can come to your own interpretation of the actual poem, that of the descent of Inanna into the underworld. Having said that, I hope that this discussion has moved you. It certainly moved me in doing the research. I hope that you are inspired to find your own answers as you seek to engage more deeply with your own spiritual path and journey. Ultimately, spirit is beyond all human conception and beyond all words, and it is something that we find in the innermost depths of our own very human experience. We don't need to clutter that. We don't need to misrepresent that. We just need to feel it for what it truly is. Having said that, thank you all for 10 years of support, and long may it continue. Take care, Very many blessings. Ciao, ciao for now. Bye bye.